Hello, everybody. I am joined by my co-host, Jim Fresca, and welcome to 10-4. Today is the Halloween special, so we're going to be talking about a creepy episode of Star Trek, and for this year, I chose the TNG episode, Schisms. Did we like the episode? Did we not like it? Stick around and find out.
Happy Halloween, Adam.
Yeah.
Halloween is my favorite holiday. I love dressing up.
I love the fact that it's the only holiday that gives me a full-on excuse to say, you know what, I'm going to watch really crazy, insane, gory horror movies nonstop for the entire month, and no one's going to question me. Jim, Schisms. From TNG, one of the later seasons, too.
Season 6, I believe.
I think it was season 6. And to me, season 6 and 7 are very hit and miss, because
Yes.
it was very clear that they were running out of ideas.
3 through 5 are the best, and then 6 and 7 are hit and miss.
Schisms I always remembered almost solely because of the concept. Alien abductions in space. Also kind of taps into a primal fear that we have of stuff happening in our sleep. And it's like we just don't know it, because we're completely unconscious. And I think that is what this episode does extremely well. Is it takes a very cliched topic, alien abductions, and adds this nice little sci-fi twist to it.
When I watched it, especially, I don't know if we're allowed to jump around different parts of the episode, but just to me, the scariest part is when they're finally in the holosuite, the table or bed, whatever thing is there, and it was the clicking. That's what got
100%.
me.
That is the creepiest part of the episode, is that moment, and I would also say it is the best part of that episode as well.
I agree.
What are your overall thoughts of the episode before we really get into this? Don't do any spoilers yet.
Overall thoughts, I liked it. It almost seemed like it was 2 episodes in one without really giving a spoiler. I'm not a fan of the ending, to be completely honest. And this is just a problem that I have with Star Trek in general. I love Star Trek, obviously. Most episodes start out with it just being a normal day, and then, poop hits the fan really quick, usually before the theme song even starts. But with this episode, it doesn't really hit the fan. It just kind of was a very slow and meticulous build-up to the cliffhanger, or whatever you want to call it. And I really like that Data's my favorite character. I didn't realize until I rewatched it last week and then again today that Ode to Spot came from this. I quote Ode to Spot in my normal talk. No one ever understands what I'm talking about. I totally forgot that it came from this episode. But I like
that entire scene, I think, is the most Star Trek scene in TNG.
Yes.
Where it's like, would you mind coming to my poetry recital? Oh, Data. God.
And that's why I say it's like a 2-part kind of episode, because you have what's going on with those select 3 characters, but then you also have what's going on with Data and his, continuation of learning how to be a human, or, have human interactions. And so I really like that aspect of the episode.
Well, kind of going on that too, it does, I like what ends up happening to Data in this episode, because he's also been abducted. I love what they do, how they explain that as well. I love that. This is one of my favorite episodes of TNG. I will flatly admit, I think the first half of this episode is vastly superior to the second half. Even though I still enjoy the second half, not so much for what they do, but how it's done. I kind of like, because I like those sort of procedural kind of, we've got a problem, we're going to bluntly get our way through it and stuff like that. I think this is a great episode that showcases the utter competence of the crew, because I love how the second they note that this isn't a coincidence, they're immediately like, we got to figure this out, we got to figure this out now. Troy's actually pretty smart in this episode. She's not just stating the obvious.
Yeah.
She's actually like, you're the third person to come to me talking about this. That's more than a coincidence.
And
especially since they're in space and they're in an exploration ship where strange stuff happens all the time. Do you have any idea how much it drives me nuts in Star Trek TNG, any Trek, where something weird happens, one of our characters is acting kind of out of the norm, and everyone just sort of turns a blind eye to it? I'm like, no, you would be on it like immediately.
That's another pro to this episode too, is because like Riker doesn't have any real reason to go to Beverly Crusher. He just thinks he's not sleeping. That's a very common thing.
Yeah,
it's not like he has a hole in his head.
Yeah, and I think that's the genius of it, as I love the slow build-up to it. Like, I love the fact that the teaser is just him falling asleep. It's very uneasy, because I think the overall direction of this episode, particularly of the actors, is superior than a lot of episodes of TNG. Yeah, this is directed by a guy named Robert Weimer. The only other episode of note that I think he's directed is Data's Day.
That's one of my favorite episodes.
It's a great episode. But I think from this time forward, we could kind of get spoilers. I did want to bring this up because I'm pretty sure I know about this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this at all. But
probably not.
This gets really big into a concept that I find really terrifying and really creepy. And ever since I've learned this as a concept, I've always been terrified by it. And it's called missing time. That people are just suddenly... they're going about doing their normal things, and then suddenly they wake up, or something has happened, and it's now suddenly hours ahead of where they previously were.
Mm-hmm.
From what, and they don't remember anything from in between that period. I have a personal connection with that, because roughly where I grew up, about 30 minutes south from where I grew up, was the Barney and Betty Hill alien abduction story, which is one of the most famous examples of missing time. I think that's what they play with in this episode, except it's sleep. We're not getting REM sleep. And it's best exemplified, I think, with Data in this episode. Because
absolutely.
Rewatching it, I forgot that Data was a part of this too. I forgot that Data was being abducted as well. And I love the moment where he's like, "What? Geordi, you just left."
This was another episode where Data, the crew in general, did not, just be like, "Oh, okay, well, blah, blah, blah." Data right then and there did a diagnostic and was like, "Yep, there's a problem. Let's figure it out."
I think that's what confirmed it to Geordi, was because suddenly Data now has that problem. Because remember, Data has kind of been a crutch for several episodes in terms of writing. Like, probably the most famous example is the one where they go to that extremely xenophobic planet, and so they have to wipe all evidence and memories of everything from the ship. But what do you do with Data?
You order him to not say anything.
Yeah.
That was before we realized that Frakes had the arm thing, right?
Right. Yeah. This is before. That happens after they figured out what's happened.
Right.
And so that's
so
where
this was the real moment where it's like, okay, something is happening.
Something bad is happening. Data suddenly's like, I wasn't just missing. I can't just remember that time. I was not on the ship at that time because of the chemical compounds and stuff like that his sensors pick up when he's on the ship. And I love how that also like validates like Frakes, Riker, it validates Geordi, and it validates all those other people too. We always think that within Star Trek we are the top of the world, we are the top of the food chain, but are we really? There are things from other dimensions that we just quite can't comprehend, and this kind of plays into that.
This is not obviously a horror episode, but do you remember the one where planet like gets destroyed and all that's left is one house and a woman and an old man, and it turns out at the end of the episode that the old man was like this unfathomable like deity that could do anything, and Picard, he couldn't do nothing against him.
When this episode came out, alien abduction stories were big. I know I said this earlier, I'll say it again now. The first half of this episode is gold.
I love when Worf goes to the barber and, he just sees the scissors. And that's another part where, like, first starts to happen. It's like, dude, I know the barber's annoying, but, like, he's just trying to cut your hair. You volunteered to go to the hair salon. Why are you freaking out? But I also love that scene just in general because that hones into the character building of not only the crew, but the ship, that this is a vessel of exploration. It's not a warship. This is a ship with leisure. There's normal things like a barber on it. And that's not scary. That's a normal thing. But because they're having these normal things in it, it makes the scary parts even more scary.
The Goji Shea in the comments actually brings something up that's very important. This was coming out at around the same time as the X-Files was going on. And that deals with this all the time. I love the bit of Riker asking Geordi to wake him up.
Well, yeah, because then he goes and lays down, and then immediately.
How that is edited and how that is directed is utter genius. I love how they use the setting to their advantage, right? So, because you're on a spaceship, right? Time isn't going to work exactly the same way as it does here on Earth. We have the sun coming up and coming down. You're on a spaceship.
It's always black.
It's always gonna look like bright fluorescent lights on this ship. Because of that, we can't tell there's a time shift.
Right.
Right? All of a sudden, it's just so brilliant. He just lays down, cuts to outside, Geordi walking up to Riker's room to wake him up. Because of that editing, we are just as disjointed as Riker is.
I did not, like, at first when he walked over and goes, oh, it's 0745. And I'm like, what? He just laid down.
It's such a genius little thing. And there's no special effects needed. Like, there's no dramatic music that was needed for that scene. I love how it's just the ambient noise of the ship.
And I think that made it hit more.
The holodeck scene is one of the best sequences in all of Star Trek, period. Each of them kind of remember things a little bit differently, but they're adding up to the same thing. That, to me, is one of the best directed sequences in all of Star Trek out of any of the shows. Deanna
was actually properly written as a psychiatrist, therapist, whatever you want to call, to really guide them through this process that they're going through. And it just seemed like a very believable if I was having the same dream as 4 other people and I went and talked to a therapist, I imagined that's how they would walk through it. But they put their, 23rd century twist on it by doing it in the holodeck to literally piece their story together.
So these aliens do have a name, by the way. They're called the Solanae, and we only get a name for them because of Star Trek Online. And I actually found the holodeck sequence much creepier than the stuff that was happening when we get to the Solanae site itself. In fact, I think that was kind of a letdown, is how flatly lit, not really flatly lit, but like the lack.
Bright.
Yeah, it was too bright. It was too
lit.
Normal.
That's the problem.
You look at the holodeck episode, you have the backgrounds just fading off into kind of darkness. And of course it makes sense because it's the holodeck, but also it was done for budgetary reasons, I found out.
Oh, yeah.
Because they didn't have the money to build a set, so just do it on the holodeck, have the backgrounds fade out to black, and a part of me is like, why didn't they just do that on the Solanae abduction scene as well,
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you mean they didn't have time to build the set? They built the set. It's the Solanae set.
For the Solanae. I think I agree with you. I think this is a great case of less should have been more.
I have a genuine fear of the dark, and it's not necessarily fear of the dark, it's fear of the unknown. So when they're in the holodeck and it's black, but then all you see is this chair with a needle on it and these restraints, and you're hearing weird noises, but you can't see where the noises are coming from, that's scary.
Well, it is scary, and I love how the director, and again, brilliant fucking direction in this episode, how the director slowly ramps up the creep factor. Like, it's just a wooden table. Okay, now make it metal. Okay, now slant it. Okay, now add some restrictions. There's a bright light shining directly down from above you.
When Geordi goes more.
Yes.
Brighter.
Oh, it's so good.
Oh.
And I love how we, the audience, begin piecing this shit together with the crew.
Then. Yeah.
And I love that because, like, the moment they start adding the restraints, you're like, they were abducted. Genius.
It's like real time, like you said. Yeah. We're learning just as they are.
Utter genius.
And
like, this is great.
It goes to what you were saying at the beginning, too, that, like, throughout most of the show, the Enterprise is the flagship. They are the best of the best. And, they are unchallenged in almost every task that they do. You, the viewer, you're just a lowly guy. Right. But now you, in this episode, they're as helpless as you are, or vice versa.
Right.
And I think that's another great aspect.
Most of my gripes I have are with the second half. There is a big plot hole with this episode. And it's really funny, because I've never noticed it before until this viewing. Riker is already having trouble sleeping before he approves Geordi's experiment. However, it is explained later that Geordi's experiment is what caught the aliens' attention.
Well, maybe that's not a plot hole then.
This is what I wanted to get into. I think this has the potential of being something a little bit more creepy. but you have to kind of meta go into it a little bit. I think it has the unintended side effect of perhaps being a little more creepy, because Riker was only one of thousands of people that they were kind of experimenting on until Geordi's experiment. So then no longer was the Enterprise just an offhand exploration. They wanted to learn more. Okay, these people have caught our attention. Is that so different, kind of, than what the Vulcans were kind of doing to us? They were watching us closely once we... Look at Star Trek Enterprise, for example. They're watching us mad on that, and they explain that quite a bit in that. But
I see what you're saying now, yeah.
There's that episode of Star Trek Enterprise, remember, where the Vulcans are on Earth, and they have to hide on Earth.
In, like, the 60s.
Yes. And I'm like, is what those aliens doing, other than them being creepy and doing medical things, much different than, let's say, even in...
I see what you're saying.
Look at any episode where we're observing pre-warp civilizations and we have like a cloaked facility in the mountain.
Great episode.
Is that any different, really?
No. The difference is, and I think that they even explain it in, part of the Prime Directive, is that we cannot interact with them.
Well, that's just
that's the benefit.
Yeah.
We're not going to touch them. We're going to be completely fly on the wall.
Yeah, we're not going to do medical experiments on them like these guys are. That's the big difference.
I did not like the end of the episode, except for that part where Picard even says that. Like, are they enemies or are they just curious? And then it cuts to black. And like, I know that's not the exact quote. I think, it's totally valid. It seemed like they tried to put Riker, like they realized they broke him and put him back together really well, mind you. Are they just curious? I think you're hitting the hammer on the nail when you're saying that, like, they could tell that we're getting to that point in our technology. The Federation is getting to their point in their technology, that they could get to this subspace plane and could be, aggressive potentially. They don't know us. They don't know the Federation. Is the Federation aggressive?
And the thing why I think this is kind of a gripe, and why I have kind of a gripe, is because I don't think the writers, and I love the writers, I do, I don't think they were this smart. I think it was just a plot hole, and this is us fans trying to fix the plot hole. Yeah. And it's completely coincidental.
You know what this reminds me of, this episode? Now that you were saying that it reminded you of an episode.
Uh-oh.
I don't remember the name of the species, but there's the episode in Voyager where the Borg are doing subspace experiments, and they find species 759 or whatever it is. Species 759 or whatever it was comes into our subspace, and we go into that got too confusing, though. What Schisms did was just enough.
Schisms, I think, is creepier, mainly because of how micro it is. It's not big, oh my god, the Borg are getting wiped out, so this enemy's really bad, kind of thing. No, it's a very micro thing. It's just the crew of the Enterprise. And I think that's one reason why I think creepier stuff is when it's really personal, because we can relate to it.
Again, less is more. My major gripe with the whole episode, and this is Star Trek just in general, whatever they're called, their design is cool. Like, I love their cloaks. Their face thing is real. Maybe not cool, but like, it's intricate. Their claw hands, they're very well designed, or at least there was a lot of thought put into them. Never seen again. That's
where Star Trek Online comes in. They have a big part in Star Trek Online.
Yeah, but they're never in canon.
Absolutely, you're correct. And plus, the new Star Trek stuff on Paramount Plus has rendered Star Trek Online not canon anyways.
But like, if these costumes and these tables were... I'm trying to think of but like, if that was a different species that is a reoccurring species, like, that ship design is kind of cool. I liked it. I'd like to see that more.
We do gotta kind of wrap this up, but there is one thing that I found really fucking hysterical, like laugh out loud hysterical.
I like funny stuff.
When they hear that there is an explosion on Cargo Bay 4, that there is an explosion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Worf and the guards and medical team just casually stroll to Cargo Bay 4, right? It hard cuts to them just casually walking towards it, and then you see Geordi and a couple of other people from engineering getting ready to go in there. As far as I was concerned, you hear that there's an explosion on your ship, run. Get there now. Though I do genuinely love that twist, though. They open it. Nothing's wrong. What are you talking about? You know, I do like that.
In the scene before, Geordi even says, like, oh, I have 2 men down there. Mm-hmm. And he, like, runs out the door, but then by the time he gets down there, he's like, oh, turbo lift was out. I'm kind of tired. Let me just walk.
I still think this is a good episode.
Overall, yes.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I just burped. That was actually Klingon East for. Thank you for joining us. Jim, I just found this to be a creepy episode. It is Halloween after all, so I just thought, time to be spooky. Why not watch a spooky episode of TNG? Well, Jim, why don't you pimp yourself out a little bit?
I have a YouTube channel. It's called Scrappy-Doo, SCRAPYD0O. I stream video games. I typically play on Thursdays. I haven't been playing for the past month or two because I was moving, but as you can see, back up in the streaming. So, yeah, Scrappy-Doo every Thursday at 8 o'clock. I typically play racing games and just anything that I find fun. So definitely come hang out. We'll talk Star Trek during the stream.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't really need to pimp myself out. All of my social media is in the description below. And until next time, guys, take care.